find a way.
So it is graduation season, and a lot of parents, a lot of us have invested so much money into kids along the way, and it's the end. And I want to talk about the role of youth sports. Like, why do we do this? Like, why do we invest so much time and so much money into youth sports? So many parents out there are in the middle of it, and they're making these investments, but they don't see like the end product of and why, right?
Right.
You've got the perspective of having coached in college for so long.
Right.
Well, when we started, like we were in our early 20s.
That's right.
And I always felt like that was such an advantage to parenting because we saw other people's kids, the end product of the end product of other people's kids before we had our own kids.
That's right.
I learned so much from that. So when you look at the end product of these kids, what is that? What are we trying to do?
I think we've got to be grounded in why we make the investment in youth sports to begin with, right? For a lot of parents and for a lot of people, it becomes about the college scholarship aspect of it. And I think it's okay. I mean, that's a potential outcome, but it's not the normal outcome. And so it really has to be grounded in something other than what's the financial benefit of this later, because there's so many more benefits to youth sports than just the potential to play in college. That's one of them. But looking at my own kids, the friendships that they made, the relationships that they built, the worldview that they formed based on others that they were interacting with and playing with, I think that was more valuable than anything they ever got in terms of their playing careers, so to speak.
Yeah.
So I also think it's a healthy lifestyle, right? I mean, we're investing in a healthy lifestyle for our children when we make this investment in youth sports.
Yeah.
So there's so many things that go beyond college scholarship potential of what we're doing. And that ultimately, when we start to think about the end product of why we do this, why do we invest, why are the things, and what are the really important things here, it's important to come at it with a little bit of a different mentality.
Yeah. I think parents get it wrong when they see the sport as the end of it and not the means to something bigger than than
really
that
profound
sport, you know? And it's like, what is it a means to? And I think about kids and the weaknesses that they have as graduates. Like, a lot of kids haven't ever had to face adversity.
Right.
They haven't learned like how to persevere through hard times, how to lead, how to be a good teammate. Like, how many employers complain about young employees that aren't good teammates? And I think back to my kids and my own, like, where do you learn these virtues outside of sports in today's world? It's pretty limited.
And I do think that's why employers place such a value on individuals that have played sports.
Yeah.
They know what it means to be in a team environment and contribute to something beyond themselves.
Yeah. Yeah, it's such a rare thing, and I think it's getting more rare because it's such an individualistic culture, and it seems to be getting more and more individualistic. And youth sports are one of the last places in our society where you can put a team above your own interests, right? And learn how to be a good teammate. And I think sometimes if there's one thing that youth sports can teach us, it's how to be a good teammate. And maybe that's enough.
It is. I think it is.
At the end of the day, that's enough. But it's not all. You know, like I think about a Paige Carlson who played for you, and I had when she was younger. This is a natural leader.
Right.
Like, I knew Paige was a leader when I met her when she was, 10 or 11 years old, right? You knew that. But like, where would she develop those leadership skills that she has now going into law school? Like, she's going to do special things, bigger things than soccer. Where would she have developed that as a kid without the game?
And that's it. I mean, that's what youth sports ultimately does, right? maybe a handful of kids do move on to play college soccer and play college sports or whatever it may be. But the long-term lasting implications of what they do are so much more significant than the playing field, so to speak, right? I mean, and it allows them to take on leadership, to take on a different voice, to give strength and to give courage to those individuals who it's like, I can do this on the field. I can do it in the classroom. I can do it in the courtroom. I can do it in the boardroom. But it's because they've gained that from age 6 to 18 playing youth sports.
Yeah. With adversity, with
right. That's got to
pressure.
be a part of it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think different sports provide different things. Like I've gotten into tennis a lot in later years. Like tennis forces an individual to like solve their own problem. Right. There's no teammates coming. There's no cavalry. There's no cavalry coming to build your confidence. You're out there literally alone on a tennis court. Right. And I love watching young kids like figure that out. And you just don't have that outside of sport. But then in other sports like soccer, you've got to learn to be a teammate. You know, so it's just different qualities, but it's like those to me is that's the real why.
I agree.
Those are make us better, stronger humans. But then there's the soccer part of it,
right?
And you think about that end product, and we've got kids graduating this week. Some of them are going to college. Some of them are going to more important things, right? So what do you want to see the end product as a player when his kids turn 18?
And I think that's something we have to remember at the end of the day, right? We are a sporting club and we are trying to direct players in the right direction within their sporting aspect.
Yeah.
Of course, there are things that come from that is the, so to speak, extras that come from playing youth sports that we just talked about. But at the core of our foundation, we're also trying to develop players.
Yeah.
And I think there's 3 components that we want to see within players. If they're in this organization for 12 years, from the time they start as a core academy player at 6, 7 years of age to when they're graduating as a senior in high school, we have an end process in mind. And I think that's really important to remember. We're not reactionary in a year-to-year type thing. We have a long-term plan. It's a long-term process. But at the end of that process, there are 3 key components. Number 1, that they have a tactical understanding of the game. They understand how to move and use space, which is tactics at the end of the day. How do I react to where the other teams move the ball? When I move the ball, how does the other team react to that? And what decisions am I making in regards to that? The second phase is technical. Do they have the ability to control the ball well? Maybe they're not wizards on the ball, but they have a good first touch. They strike the ball cleanly in terms of long service or shots or whatever it may be. And they're passing. They have a good short range of the passing. So you've got that tactical and technical impact from soccer, but most importantly, that they have character. And that character comes from the adversity that you were talking about, right? They've got the grit. They can withstand the hard moments. And I think so that when we get to the end of it, we really want to see FC Alliance North players with those components in their game, in their personalities. That to me would be just the ideal world of when that player is graduating out of our club, that's what he or she has.
And they're so interconnected. And this is the thing that, like, I think you in particular have really recognized and reminded me is you can't think about technical apart from tactical. But I don't think you can think about technical and tactical apart from character either. And so, like, it's not just about learning to take a first touch or a proper pass. It's like, when do you make that pass? Right?
Absolutely.
Who do you make that pass to? And that's where you can't separate you can't separate the technical from the tactical. So I see people thinking like, oh, I'll have a day of the week of technical training. Right? It doesn't that's not how this works.
Not within like the team training environment for sure.
Yeah.
Can players go away and do individual technical work on their own? Absolutely. But and we want players to be ball masters, and that only comes from spending time with the ball. But when we're talking about the team training environment, we do way too much of, isolated training, so to speak, that doesn't really correlate to a game when I have to pass to a teammate.
Yeah.
I have to move.
Yeah.
I may have to adjust my run based on what the defense is doing. And so we have to teach that technical environment under pressure.
Yeah. And what is tactical? Like, tactical is decision making.
Absolutely.
Right? Which is another part of the end product.
Absolutely.
Is decision making. Like in my real business, we are bringing in franchise owners, right? And so we get a lot of leads and we select very few of them. And one of the indicators of success that we have found is decisiveness. Like, it's okay to make a wrong decision. Hopefully you make the right decision, but it's okay to make the wrong decision. The real problem, the real path to failure is don't make a decision at all.
Yeah, and it's the same thing that happens in soccer, right? Yeah. I mean, the game happens so quickly that if you're indecisive and you're debating, you're going to make the wrong decision. It's the reality in the soccer game. And we find that the best players are the ones who predict the game. They don't react to the game, they predict the game.
Yeah. And they're making so many decisions, like off the ball movement, on the ball movement. There's so many decisions that you make, and the higher the level you play. And that's why I think there's value in playing at a higher level. Yeah, you can have fun playing at a rec level, but to really develop these life skills at a high level, the higher level you play, the more complicated decisions you're making, the harder you have to work.
I agree.
Right?
I mean, well, because the higher level you play, the opposition is that more sophisticated as well.
Yeah.
And so and I think it's within the game day environment, we have to think about that as well, because games are important in terms of the development of the player, but ultimately our training environment has to be one that allows players to excel in the game. And I think as I walk around the United States and I watch training sessions, we do a lot of things in isolation. And isolation is what we've been doing for the last 30 years.
Yeah.
And where has it put us? If anything, we're farther behind the rest of the world than we were 30 years ago.
Yeah. What separates world-class players from the average players that we might produce? Like, the difference between the top players in Europe and your top players in America. It's not athleticism.
No, not at all.
It's not speed. It's not strength. It is decision making.
100%. And because we, again, isolate things, we don't put players into situations where they have to predict an outcome. They're reacting maybe. Yeah. And I really have been doing like a lot of reading and research on this aspect of things. And ultimately, the brain does predict the outcome based on patterns that it sees and input. Just like if we put a lot of negative thought into our brains, we're going to predict a negative outcome. If we put a lot of positive thoughts into our brain, we're going to have a more predictive, positive outcome. Same thing when we go to train players in the game. We want them to put them in positions where they're going to have success. So that's why we do a 4 versus 2 rondo versus a 4 versus 4 rondo.
Yeah.
A 4 versus 2, they're going to have more opportunities to keep it, to still work on their technical possession, but they're going to have more opportunities for success.
Yeah.
So the brain predicts success. You know?
There's so much to unpack
and all those things
there. When you think about that difference between those world-class players and our good players, it's decision making, right? It's seeing those patterns. It's recognizing those patterns. And I think one of the biggest weaknesses that Americans have is we so prioritize athleticism, and we think that we can build a bigger, faster athlete and make them a world-class player. And it's just proven itself not to be the case, right? But I don't think it's just soccer either. I think it's a lot of sports.
In basketball, the rest of the world is catching up to us.
Look at the NBA.
Yeah. It's dominated by Eastern Europeans.
Yeah, and why? They are not the fastest. Mm-mm. They're not the biggest, but they
think the game better than anybody else.
And they anticipate it. They see the patterns, and they're in many cases they're dominating the NBA right now. Even go back to Kobe Bryant.
Yeah.
You listen to Kobe Bryant talk about, what made him so good. He'll bring up that he grew up in Italy in that culture, in a soccer culture. He loved the game and he was forced to like make decisions and solve problems. And when you talk about isolating training, a lot of that leads to creating robots, right? That aren't
Absolutely.
making decisions. So they're going through the motions, they're going through cones or whatever. They're not making decisions. And so we're creating robots that can't function at a higher level.
I see it in the college game all the time right now. If you have a player that can get you 10 to 12 goals a year, she's probably an All-American, because so few players have the creativity in the final third. They have the willingness to take players on in the 1v1. And it's not just taking players on in the 1v1. It's recognizing when to take the player on in the 1v1. It's recognizing when to create the goal as opposed to keeping it. There's a couple of elements that I think play into that. Our training, I think, has a big part of that in the way we train players. I think the second part of it is our players don't watch the game enough.
Yeah.
You and I earlier were talking about the Champions League in the last couple of weeks here and the quality of those games and how exciting they've been and some of the goals that were scored in Wednesday's game. Unbelievable, right? How many of our players in our club watched those and saw that game?
So
I know it's in the middle afternoon.
But they're not seeing those patterns.
Right.
Right? The rest of the world is watching those games and the kids are seeing those patterns of the pros. Our American kids aren't watching.
Right.
So they're not seeing those patterns. And if they are watching, they're watching little clips without the context of the off the ball movement.
Right. How did that ball move from the left channel through the central channel into the final channel? And then the goal comes. And we see the ball from the right channel into the box and the goal being scored. But we don't really have an understanding of how teams pivoted the ball sometimes multiple times to move the opposition enough to create the space for the goal scoring.
Yeah.
And we see that final product and we think, oh, you just got to hit it from there to there and you'll score. And if you don't move the team, and that's one thing that, I think we fail to understand is defending is becoming more sophisticated as well.
For sure.
And you have to move teams out of space so that you can get into the space that you want. And again, it goes back to the pattern recognition. It goes into decision making. And I think we have to do a better job of training that in the training environment across this country if we really want to see U.S. soccer take off.
Let's go deep into, let's take that goal scorer that you mentioned earlier. So hard to find a goal scorer in women's soccer.
Yeah.
Right? Like those are really hard to find. And when you find one, they're super valuable. Let's look at the training environment that we need to create in order to create those goal scorers.
And again, I think when we see striker training, so to speak, right? It's no opposition, dribbling in, hitting a ball, sometimes on an empty net.
Yep.
Maybe you can get some of the technique refined, but when you have a center back that you have to dribble past, a defender coming in from a covering position, and you've got to get the shot off into a narrow window of space, dribbling in and out of cones through a couple of poles or what it may be, not going to give you the mental picture that it takes to actually score in the game.
Yeah.
And that's what we consider striker training. And that's what I see a ton of these technical coaches going out there, and they're doing things that kids could go do on their own.
Yeah.
But it's not really helping the translation from training to scoring in a game.
Yeah.
I'm 50 years old. I could probably score 9 out of 10 in that environment. But if you put me in a game, I'd be lucky to get one in the back of the net.
Yeah. Because goal scoring has to be done in incredibly small spaces, right? Midfielders, defenders sometimes have more space to work with. A goal scorer in the final third has such small spaces. So decisions have to be made going back to the tactical. It's not just technical. It's like these decisions on and off the ball have to be made so quickly.
Right.
And that's the difference between the goal scorers.
Right.
Is they're decisive. And they find those spaces so well.
And Matt, I'm thinking here of when we watch college and professional teams warm up a lot of times, right? They do a finishing kind of exercise. And we think that is what they do in training. I've watched professional levels. I've watched academy level training. You don't see that. That's an activation exercise. That's just to get the body ready, the muscles loose. That's an activation exercise. That is not an actual training exercise that anybody would use outside of that. And I see the Instagram and YouTube videos of these professional teams. That's what they do in the first 15 to 20 minutes to activate the body, but it's not something they really count on that, I'm going to go score in a match out of this. Yeah.
So in America, kids aren't watching the game.
Right.
So it's almost like there's more responsibility on us as coaches that we have to squeeze a lot out of that hour and a half session, because our kids aren't recognizing those patterns on TV. So we have to manufacture that. We have to do a lot of things in that hour and a half.
I think if you look at if I'm designing ideal training sessions, and I have to think about where our players are right now. A lot of the players in the States don't have the technical nuance because they don't grow up playing the game on the playground, and they're not playing in their free time. And like, you get that in the rest of the world. You're playing in the streets or in the park or whatever it may be. So the technique is better from that aspect. So we're probably going to have to spend 12 to 15 minutes at the beginning of most sessions introducing some individual technical. I really think it's not something that I would say you're going to see at a Barcelona. But here in the States, we have to adapt. We have to think about giving also exercises a player can go away and do on his or her own. But my next progression will be quickly into a rondo where it's 4 versus 2 at the younger ages, and I really keep it at 2 defenders or limited defenders. Eventually, at the older ages, it might be 8 versus 3. But we're trying to build success and translate that technical aspect over to the playing aspect.
But those nuances are important. Like rondo, it's like, is it 4v2? Is it 4v3?
Right.
Is it 4v4 plus 1?
Right.
How much space? Right? Like the space, if the players are not as skilled, then the space has to be bigger. If it's too big, skilled players are going to get bored. So it's like these nuances is the art of all this.
That's where really good coaching comes in. And really good coaches can recognize, do I need to adjust the space? Is it too big? Is it too small? And I mean, the good ones do it on the fly. They stop it and say, hey, let's go 3 steps wider, guys or girls, and so, and I look at that where you mentioned like the 4v4 plus 1. To me, that's kind of the next progression in my training cycle of in a smaller rondo. And then I'm in a bigger space that's maybe to goal. I'm doing it to 2 goals or 4 goals or something like that. We have 2 players on our team at eTissue that I coached when they were 8 and 9 years old. And, they've got the technical proficiency. They understand how to escape pressure. They can take a first touch into the right space. And that wasn't because I'm like this brilliant coach. It's just putting them in environments where they understand how to read the game and react and predict the game. Where I failed them a little bit was it was all possession. It wasn't enough of how do we progress into the attacking phase? How do we create goals out of this? And so that would be something I've added in over the last several years is there's a progression from the possession into translating it into goals, which is ultimately how we win games, right?
Yeah. Because if you look at the good players that we have produced in America, they're typically midfielders.
Absolutely.
Like I describe it as a country. We've created a country of midfielders and no goal scorers. But then I also think goal scorers have to be able to take risks. Goal scorers can't count the goals they miss.
Right.
Like you have to be decisive and you have to go for it and you have to take risks, find a 1v1 and you attack it. You don't have time to think about the risks.
And I think, again, Matt, that goes back to coaching because how many times do we see young players who are willing to take on in the final third and who have that bravery component, who have the courage component, and we're yelling at them to pass. Parents are yelling at them to pass. And then we're getting in the car and calling that kid a ball hog or whatever it may be. And that's self-defeating ultimately. We need kids who have that courage and that bravery and the willingness in the right areas to take chances. And we coach that out of a lot of kids.
Yeah, it happens way too often. Like I feel like we could spend an entire podcast on what we're doing to discourage kids from being goal scorers, especially on the women's side. And on the women's side, you've got the psychological part of it too, where a young girl is a goal scorer and the adults sometimes clip her wings. And so there's a psychological component on the women's side that don't necessarily have to deal with on the men's side, but it's creating that environment where kids can take risks, which is part of the art of the coaching.
Right.
Right?
Yeah, I mean, do you think when Michael Jordan got to the Bulls that Phil Jackson and the coaches that were working with him said, hey, pass the ball to your teammates?
Yeah.
I mean, where would Michael Jordan be today if his coach and his fans and the other players on the team were like, pass the ball to somebody else?
Yeah.
I think we have to appreciate those types of individuals, and we have to strive to create more of them. Of course, you and I are dating ourselves when we talk about these from the 90s and things like that. But I think it resonates with, to me, what we're trying to create is individuals who are not afraid to fail.
Yeah. And that's an easy statement that is really hard to do in our culture.
Right.
And when I've talked to a lot of different coaches on here, and many of them have pointed to that as the biggest problem, is kids are afraid to fail. I don't know why that is. I haven't figured that out, but it's a real thing. And it's like we have to manufacture. Maybe it's because kids are on camera 24/7.
It's true.
Like I could fail. I made lots of mistakes, but nobody was filming it and putting it on social media, right? These kids are literally going to the grocery store and they could be on social media.
Yeah.
So maybe that's feeding it. I don't know, but it's a real thing. And I feel like every year we have to work harder to manufacture these environments where kids are not afraid to fail.
Ultimately, that's to be the high. If we get players, and go back to that, what do we want when a player graduates? And we're talking about that character and the grit that they've withstood adversity. That's that kid. They're not afraid to take chances. They're not afraid that a negative outcome is going to come from it. Yeah. But I think we have to think about it from the parent's perspective, from the coach's perspective. Ultimately, what are we encouraging? Because a lot of times that environment that we create as the adults in youth sports, that's the outcome, right? I mean, if we create the wrong environment where kids are afraid to fail, that's on us. It's not on the kid. It's on the coach and the parents that are creating that environment.
Yeah. I see that a lot in basketball. Like mistakes, you make a mistake, they pull you out.
Like, good point.
You miss a shot and they pull you out. Like, what is that doing to kids? Like, it's making them play safe. And there's nothing worse to watch in the entire world than a basketball game of players afraid to make a mistake, right?
So true.
Like, what are we creating here? And so, but soccer coaches can do it too. But it's like it's like we have to manufacture this environment, and it's an art. It's not easy. So there's a lot going on here. Like you take a session. It can't just be technical. Right. It can't just be tactical. Right. We have to mix those things. The character is intermixed in there too. Like how do you handle it when you do make a mistake? Right.
And I think too many times what I see is when a player makes a mistake, the first thing their head does, they look sideways. What did coach say? What did my parents say?
Yeah.
They don't put their head down and say, I made a mistake. I'm going to get the next one right.
Yeah.
And I think that's, again, goes back to what type of environment are we creating within our training sessions.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that every coach is always going to get this right, but I think it's something we have to strive towards. I don't get it right all the time, right?
Yeah,
you know,
it's
but I think it's something we have to strive for. And that's what we want to try to develop within our coaches, is that they're creating an environment that's positive, that they're reinforcing the good outcomes.
Yeah.
Correcting the bad outcomes at the right moments, but not necessarily right as it happens, or even stopping the training and saying, you did this, this, and this.
Yeah.
It's much better if you can coach it on the fly and playing it on the fly and then continuing on with the game.
Yeah. Yeah. And in there, it's not just coach centric. Mm-hmm. Like in there, you've also got some leaders.
Right.
Like a Paige. 11-year-old Paige, people make a mistake, she's going to build them up. Right. She's going to be not just be a good leader, but a good teammate. But soccer helped her to learn that. Yeah.
And I think that's where, again, it's the environment that the adults are creating and encouraging those moments. And if we do see players that are being overly negative or overly critical, of having the courage to confront that in the right ways and say, look, how are you helping your teammate in this moment? If you're in a rough spot, you probably want one of your teammates to help you.
Yep.
How are you helping your teammate in this moment? So it goes back to all about the environment that we create as adults for the youth players. And if we create the wrong environment, we're going to get a negative outcome.
Yeah. It's a double-edged sword. Like, it's very easy to create a toxic environment.
100%.
Right? Kids are afraid to fail. Kids are afraid to make mistakes. So we're trying to do a lot of things. There's a technical, there's the tactical, there's the character part of it, all in that hour and a half. But it's even more complicated than that, because now you're also trying to develop a team and 15 individuals.
Right. Yeah. And so I think if we start to think about those development kind of phases, where we think about core academy through U19 and they're finishing up at the end of their career.
From 6-year-olds to 18-year-olds.
Right. And there are phases that we have to go through there. In the first phase, it is individual development, but individual development occurs within a team environment. So you can't isolate it, like I was saying earlier. You cannot isolate the technical from the ability to play, 4 versus 4. You have to have a good first touch. You have to have the ability to pass the ball. You have to have the ability to dribble and beat players in 1v1. All those things that are individual skills play into a team environment. Mm-hmm. So soccer is a really nuanced sport in that regard. And so, but I think if we think about the phases, first phase is really isolated individual development, that we want the player to have a good technical foundation, have the ability to connect passes within 2 to 3 other players, and the ability to start to think about how long of a pass can I play and get the ball over distance.
Yeah.
So it's all individual. It's not about how many goals my team scored this week. It's not about did we win or lose this weekend. Yeah. And I've used this many times. If team success at the younger ages was a predictor of long-term success, Major League Baseball would be full of Little League World Series participants.
Yep. And it's not.
It's not. It's like less than 3%.
Kids that play in the Little League World Series do not end up being major leaguers.
Right. And a lot of them don't even go on to high-level college sports. Yeah. It's early matures a lot of times, right? That happens a lot at the younger ages. And so we cannot think, well, my team won the tournament this weekend, we're doing all the right things. Just like we can't think we lost the tournament this weekend, so we must be doing all the wrong things.
Yeah. And in soccer, doing the wrong things developmentally will lead to success at the younger ages. That's
so true.
That is the hard part about this game. But when you're talking about a 12-year, you're talking about the long view of developing that player.
And that's hard, Matt, because you have parents and coaches that have the courage to be patient.
Yeah.
Because it's not going to be overnight. It's not going to be instantaneous. We see a lot of players at 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 not be some of the stronger players on their team. But if they do the right things, it does pay off over time. But you got to stay invested. You got to recognize that what is happening now is going to have a payoff at 14, 15, 16 when we do progress into the competitive stage. That's where we have to think about competition. That's where we have to think about opposition that we're playing against. Tab Ramos recently said, we don't play enough competitive games in this country. I looked at some scores from a tournament last weekend. It was 21-0.
Yeah.
What did either team get out of that? What did the individuals on that team get out of that?
Yeah. It's all such a fine balance of things. Like, you're developing the individual, you're developing the team all at the same time. Every individual is unique. You've got your goal scorer in there.
Right.
That has certain qualities. And they need certain things in that training session that another kid who has a different set of qualities might not need. You've got the overly confident kid on the boys' side against the kid that lacks confidence. Mm-hmm. And so it's like the art of it is how do you develop this team. But at the younger ages especially, it's not about the team. It's about developing all those little individuals.
And I think that goes back to, though, the culture and philosophy of your club ultimately, right?
Yeah.
Because too many times I see club teams that are kind of on an island and there's no consistency throughout the club. There's no consistency of how we want to approach this.
Yeah.
It's really down to each individual coach or the chemistry amongst the parents or whatever it may be. We really need to be striving to create consistent club philosophy, consistent philosophy across the country of this is what's important to us. And let's take those American values of athleticism, hard work, grit that we have traditionally had, and let's let that turn into something bigger.
Yeah.
I've said this a lot. Anybody heard you and I talk about this in the past? We've been doing this as a country for 40, 50 years now since U.S. soccer kind of came on the scene. Early 90s, we got into that, the first World Cup that for so many years, right? Yeah. And then, the U.S. hosted the World Cup, and we saw and then, in what was it, 2002, we made the quarterfinals. Like, oh, we finally arrived.
South Korea, yeah.
It's all gone backwards, hasn't it?
Yeah.
And why? It's like we were making strides and we were making progress and we were coming on the world scene, developing players that were having success at a high level. And then over the last 20 years or so, it's all gone backwards. And I think it's got to be about the coaching philosophy. It's got to be what we're doing at the club level. We have to examine that.
I've thought a lot about this. My hunch is that there's two primary things that are disadvantages for Americans. First is it's not a country, it's a continent.
True.
Right? Like, it's really hard to develop a personality around an entire continent.
Right.
Like, it's easier if you're Croatia or you're Iceland to embrace a common personality. How do you define a personality that includes Southern California and New England, right? Like, that's really, and then it's such a melting pot. It's almost like a disadvantage that way. But I think the bigger thing is the short-sightedness that our culture has. It's really hard for us to see player development as a 12-year process.
Right.
And we're thinking so much about winning this weekend. What can we do now? And we're doing a disservice to these kids who need to be developed over 12 years.
And I think it's one of those things where we want kids to be competitive. We want kids to want to win, right?
Yeah.
That's natural.
Yeah.
But when we overemphasize the result and we put the big athletic kid up front and we kick it long to the big athletic kid and they outrun everybody and they go score a goal, that's where it becomes detrimental of focusing on winning only at the expense of the development of all the players in the team.
Yeah.
We also play small-sided too little. I mean, the rest of the world right now is transitioning to more small-sided.
Yeah.
In Germany and England, they're going to play 4v4 through U9. They're going to play 77 through U13. Yeah. They're going to play 9v9 through U15.
Yeah.
They're not going to introduce 11v11 until U15. That's what's happening in the rest of the world because they see that we've taken away that individual flair. And you really think about, I think there's fewer and fewer goal scorers across the world as well. Yeah. There's fewer and fewer players that are magicians, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's because we've hurried up the process.
Yeah.
Instead of saying tighter space teaches better, it makes players react to decisions. They make better decisions when they've had to make them in tighter spaces.
Yeah, and more repetitions on the ball, more
shooting opportunities in front of goal as well.
But when you look at that, when you look at a player as a 12-year process, there are things that you do for a 7-year-old.
Right.
They're different than what you do for a 15-year-old. And so it's like these younger age groups, 10 and below, are such important parts of that player development.
Right.
I've been working with 6 and 7-year-olds.
Right, the Core Academy in Bristol here.
Absolutely. And I haven't done that in a while. First, it takes enormous amounts of energy, but I've really enjoyed it because these kids are like sponges, man. You show them something and they can do it.
Right.
When they're 6 or 7, you show a 15-year-old, you got to show them like 100 times.
The habits aren't ingrained. You know, it's and you've made that remark to me a few times this spring about these kids are like sponges, and you're so right. Psychologically, we also know that from those core ages of 6 to 11, that is the greatest opportunity to imprint on kids the way that they can be thinking about their technical and tactical development. After that, the brain becomes more resistant. It becomes less pliable. And so we have to think about seizing those golden years of development and making the most of them.
You know what else I've noticed is they're less afraid of failure.
You're right, 100%. They haven't got to that point in their probably psychological development phase where it matters to them, you know.
We had 6-year-olds last night. I introduced the Maradona just for kicks to see how they were doing it under pressure. In 1 hour, they were doing it under pressure.
Right.
You do try to do the same thing with a 14-year-old. Like they're looking around, afraid their friends are going to see them.
Right. Make fun of them, look at you, being silly, whatever it may be.
But it's reminded me of what an important part of the player development process these U10s are. And I think we often waste that time on trying to teach positions and teaching things that can be taught later and not taking advantage of the things that are important. So when we look at that, when you look at that 12-year process, you've got a curriculum. And this is not something that you've made up out of your own mind.
No, this is not a Matt Yelton creation. So
it's been done before. It's a proven concept in different big clubs around the world.
Yeah, I had a chance, you know, when I moved into the academy side of things and the youth club side of things from college, which is a different training environment. And what I was doing in my training sessions at the collegiate level don't translate to what 7, 8, and 9-year-olds should be doing.
Yeah.
So I went and studied. I was like, what are they doing? And what's the session look like at the top levels of youth soccer or professional soccer? What are they doing in their academies? There's a difference in terms of where players are at 8, 9, and 10 there because number one, they've grown up studying and watching the game and playing the game from the time they can walk. So their technical proficiency is higher. But you're not going to walk into a training session at any of those top level clubs and see players working in isolation. You're not going to see players standing in line, passing a diamond. You're not going to see players dribbling in and out of cones. None of that stuff's going to happen. What you're going to see, and what I took away from that is, and I did adapt it more to where players at that point in Chattanooga were. Like what do they need in terms of that aspect of their development? And what we came away with was a situation where players were put under pressure to use technical skill but have success. So that's where you adjust the size of your grid or whatever it may be. You and I were talking earlier. I said I have like thought process of the magic session, so to speak, at 7v7, 9v9, 11v11, whatever it may be. But it all starts with a rondo. It all starts with how do I keep possession in a pressure situation? Typically, it's a numbers, 4, 5 versus 3, whatever it may be. But I would progress into that 4v4 plus 1 that you're kind of talking about, which is four players on one team taking on 4 players for another team, but you have numerical superiority with a neutral player, recognizing how to find the open player. All of it goes back to training the brain to make good decisions, training the brain to predict an outcome, because the brain doesn't react. And so we have that as curriculum-wise where it progresses from the youngest of ages. Even in our core academy, we're trying to create, even maybe it's a 3 versus 1 there, you know, but it's training players to use their technical skill under pressure. And so if you just think about pure numbers, core academy would be 3v1 is the base of it. 7v7 is 4 versus 2. The 9v9 is 5 versus 3. Our 11v11 maybe is 8 versus 4. But it's always a numbers up possession, trying to think about how do I use my skill while under pressure.
Yeah. And the environment is player centric. And I think that's another weakness that we have in American culture, is because so many of our sports have become so coach centric. In football, a coach calls the play. In basketball, the coach is constantly dictating where players go. Soccer doesn't work.
No, and I think that's where across the board, we as coaches have to learn to also trust our players to take the principles from training and correlate it to the game.
Yeah.
We probably do emphasize the game more than we should here, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I was in Ireland a few months ago and was one of my friends' younger nieces was playing, and they're 11. I said, well, how many games you play today? And they looked at me like I was like one. We played one game today. That's what you do on the weekend. You train all week and you play one game on the weekend. And your training leads into that one game. Yeah. And for us, we're all, and travel's a part of it. I get it. We don't want to drive to Knoxville for one game. We don't want to drive to other places and play one game. Yeah. But we play so many games that the games lose value. Yeah. We don't put that, I'm looking forward to that moment. Yeah. And so I think that's something that we have to get back towards, where players look forward to the game, and there's the ability in that amount of time to say, did my training this week lead into, not that we're preparing for a specific opponent, did I see the things that I'm trying to implement within this team in the game environment?
Yeah. If you think about the progression of coaching a skill, it starts with, can you do this skill without pressure?
Right.
Right. It's very simple.
Right.
The next is, now, can you do this skill under simple pressure? Right.
Right.
So maybe that's the rondo, where you're 4v2 advantage. Can you do it there? You're working toward the ultimate goal of, can you execute this skill in the most complicated environment, which is the game day environment, right? And you have to take a player from simple to complex.
But we stop it most of the time in our training environment at simple, because as coaches, we think, oh, somebody's watching my training session, or the players aren't progressing to that next phase, so I failed somewhere along the line. Yeah. And so it's adults who are afraid to fail as well. Yeah. But I think we leave it at simple because it's like, oh, we can master simple. Yeah. And we feel really good about ourselves when we master simple, but it's progressing to that next stage takes bravery.
Right. And it's an art too. Like, how do you apply a little bit more pressure without being too much pressure? So there is art in there, right?
Absolutely.
Like, how do you get them from simple to complex? Like, and that's the art. That's the art of coaching.
And that's where we want to, within what we're doing with the club here, put coaches that have that experience and have been able to develop that art around other coaches who are maybe new to it and haven't really had that experience, and give them feedback and say, I had to learn that on my own. I didn't really have that mentor that helped me with that. And I so wish I had, because I feel like I would, I'm 50 now, and I would feel like I would be so much farther along in my coaching career if I would have had somebody in my 20s say, I know you planned a session for, a 10 by 10 space, but if you make it 12 by 12, it's going to come off a lot better. And that's where I think we can really impact the coaches of tomorrow within this club, by having that sort of feedback. And that's what we're going to strive to really improve this year, is giving coaches more help in that regard.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really rewarding stuff. Let's talk about the game and the game day environment. You're thinking about, we're thinking about that end product, that 18-year-old that we want to send off into the world with more confidence, more decisiveness, more assertiveness, being able to stick their chest out in the face of it, in the face of adversity, to be able to walk through a dark alley and be able to defend themselves. Right? These are all like character traits, strength that comes through playing the game at a high level. What role do you think the game on Saturday plays in all that? Again,
I think it's something where we diminish it because we play so many of them, and I think a good rule of thumb is like one game a week. If whatever your season's length is, you should be striving for one game a week. But I think that's part of the problem with the player in the United States. They play so many games as youth, and I see it translate from the college. Like, they struggle now at the college level to really like switch it on game day. So many games, it's just another game, And the best players are the ones who are able to flip the switch and be like, I'm here to compete today. So that's the first thing I feel like we've got to be looking for on game day.
Yeah.
Who are the players that it's like, this is it, I'm here. I'm ready to compete. I'm ready to give my best, and I'm okay with giving my best. And that, to me, ultimately are the two things that I feel like we should take away from games. Am I shying, or am I taking on competition and willing to take on competition? And am I okay that my best is enough? Those are the two things that I really feel like, outside of everything else, we want to emphasize to players.
Yeah. You look at a game and it presents more adversity than a practice session does. You've got people watching, you got people that you care about, care about watching. So there's this element of responsibility in the game. And I think another character trait that the game can teach is responsibility. You know?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like this pressure situation, you've got 10 other teammates. There's a problem to solve. Do I take responsibility to solve that problem, or do I pass that problem on to someone else?
Yeah. And I think that goes back to those foundations that we're talking about in the progression. The forward's not going to take the responsibility if we've coached it out of them at 10, 11, 12, 13. They play like a midfielder even though they're a forward, right? Yeah. They're always looking to pass. They're not looking to necessarily finish chances. They're not necessarily looking to create chances. It's, Can I pass it to somebody else? Because I don't have the belief in my system. And I really believe it's because of the environment that we created 4, 5, 6 years ago for that player, not what we're creating in that moment. And that's where the long-term aspect of it becomes so important, and why we can't be dialed in to one weekend of play or even one season of play. We have to think about it in the long term. And if you don't feel like your club truly does have a long-term plan that moves beyond the individual or moves beyond the weekend success, then you really should be looking for another club.
It's got to do this at a high level. It's got to be a longer-term project. And I think youth sports, and I go back to like, one of our weaknesses is the short-sightedness of our culture. And we think about one team, one season, and we're not thinking in long term. Like this season is not an end in of itself. Your U8 season is a means to developing that kid at 18.
And I think, though, we want things to be comfortable, right? I mean, like, everybody loves it when it's comfortable. Change is hard. Angst of change makes our lives difficult. And we try to remove that pretty often, right? I mean, like, if I'm thinking about my life, it's like, do I really want to go through that? I mean, U.S. soccer has thrown that at us again. I went through this 10 years ago, and now I'm getting ready to go through it. The age groups are changing again. And that creates angst, adversity. But if you come out the other side of that adversity with success, you've taught your kid a lesson. Hey, you're going to have to change. You're going to have to play with a different set of kids. But ultimately, your ability to take on that challenge is going to help you at 20, 21, 22, whatever it may be, when life throws you a curveball.
Yeah.
And that's where short-sighted thought is so self-defeating. And I have to think long-term, what is my kid getting from this beyond it's a comfortable environment for him or her?
Yeah. Yeah. So only grow in uncomfortable situations. We all do. So you built something, you were a part of building something pretty special in Chattanooga. You were central to that. Like, I remember when Chattanooga soccer was, I won't say it was the laughing stock of the state, but no one was afraid of going to Chattanooga to play soccer games. And over the course of 5 years, Chattanooga became like really, really good teams. Like, I'm talking about in the Southeast.
Yeah. And again, Matt, that wasn't anything I did on my own. I had a lot of good partners and a lot of people, a lot of great coaches that I was able to work with. But those coaches trusted the process of, this is what we're implementing. And, we got a lot of people on the same page. The culture of the club was really, really good. Parents and players believed in what we were doing. And it's interesting, like there was one team in a particular age group. It was the best team in the club, had multiple talented players on it. And 2 or 3 got impatient and said, and they, again, thought there was more outside of Chattanooga, so to speak. Eventually, those 3 kids that left and went to other pastures to outside of the area stopped playing. They stopped playing at 16, 17, 18 years of age. Some didn't even finish their high school careers. But the ones who stayed are all playing at pretty high levels, one professionally in MLS. 3 or 4 others on that team are playing Division I college soccer. And the parents had the courage to be patient in that. But it was something that we developed as there is a long-term process to this. And we went and we studied other areas and we looked at what are clubs in Atlanta doing? What are clubs in Argentina doing? What are clubs doing in England? And it was a synthesis of all those environments that we brought back to Chattanooga, created a pattern of play, so to speak, our philosophy of play. It was a long process. Now, I have used a lot of that here in terms of what we've shared with our coaches about here's what we're looking to do. This is how we want to play. This is how we want training sessions to look like. We've got to do a better job in oversight to make sure that that's happening within the training session. And that big point of emphasis for us this coming year is being on the field more, working with our coaches more, hopefully seeing the implementation of that training style. But I think if we can do that, special things can be done in Northeast Tennessee.
Yeah, I can sense the growing excitement from you
Right.
about what's possible, what's possible here.
And all of us that are kind of involved in this, right? Myself, you, Chad, this is home for us ultimately.
Yeah.
We would love nothing more than Northeast Tennessee to become a bastion of youth soccer, of what it's supposed to look like and the development process. And I think you guys had that for a number of years here where you put out several players that went on to high levels of the game. I want to recapture those moments. I want to see, kids go on to high levels of success, but even the ones who don't translate into, college or professional soccer, that they love the game. That's the most important thing for me when a player finishes, that they love the game of soccer and they're waking up on a Saturday morning to watch a Premier League game or a La Liga game or whatever it may be because they love the game.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a big part of that 18-year-old that's graduating.
Absolutely.
If we've done it well, they have confidence in themselves, but they love the game, and they can travel anywhere in the world and make friends.
Right.
Because they have this common love of the game. Like they can speak any language, right?
But think about it, Matt. I think we're starting to see a little bit of that. Think about some of our U9s here in Bristol.
Yeah.
That come up and give you and I a hard time about whatever club that we may support, but they're watching the game now.
Yeah.
And I see it when they play. I see them understanding, okay, I should be moving. I should be thinking about the space. I hope that I think honestly, that is the element that can take American youth soccer to the next level, is when our 8, 9, and 10-year-olds are watching the game and giving you a hard time about being an Arsenal supporter and me a hard time about being a Liverpool supporter. That's, I think, the element that's going to take us forward.
Yeah, it is super important and undervalued, and the kids, there is a pattern. Kids that make it to the highest level have not only themselves, but have parents that watch the game, with them. Like it's pretty cool. It's pretty cool to see. And I'm hoping that we can beat PSG next week. We go on to the final. We beat Barcelona, and every one of these 6 and 7-year-olds becomes an Arsenal
Premier League winners in Liverpool.
That is the real end game of all this. Well, good stuff, man.
Yeah.
Thanks for being here.
Always enjoy it.
Yep.